We'll briefly touch base with regard to some upcoming oil and gas events. As the GMI, we're trying hard not to duplicate work that's going on out there, and there's a lot going on with the oil and gas sector in particular, so trying to build the network literally with regard to what's happening and where you can spend your time. But then we'll have a quick wrap up and set up the stage for the next meeting early next year. I don't see any questions. I think that should be pretty straightforward. If we move to the next slide, then we will set up the GMI Secretariat. And Christine, over to you if you could introduce yourself and then enter your portion of it.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Sema. Yes, hi everyone. My name is Christine DeRue. I'm a member of the Global Methane Initiative Secretariat team, and I'll be talking about our work today. I'm also the technical lead for the wastewater sector, as well as a representative from the US EPA Climate Change Division. Next slide, please. Thanks. All right, so I'll just start by providing a quick overview of the Global Methane Initiative for those who may be new to us today, and this will be a refresher for those who are already partners. So the Global Methane Initiative, or GMI, is an international public-private partnership focused on reducing barriers to the recovery and use of methane as a valuable energy source. GMI does this through three major avenues. We provide technical support, disseminate informational resources, and collaborate with our international organizations, otherwise known as our strategic partners, on methane mitigation work to support our partner countries, which are countries that have joined our network formally, and private sector partners, otherwise known as our project network members, to work on methane mitigation work. So we provide technical support to our public and private partners by developing technical analyses, resources, tools, all to identify methane mitigation opportunities. We focus these products and services in the three highest methane emitting sectors, which form our subcommittee groups, like the oil and gas group here today. We also have the biogas subcommittee, which includes municipal solid waste, agriculture, specifically manure management, and wastewater work, as well as our coal mine subcommittee. GMI acts as an informational resource by helping build capacity amongst our partners to identify methane emission resources and mitigation opportunities, as well as track reductions to assist in disseminating technical information on mitigation best practices through our communications work. We are collaborators with our international organization, our strategic partners, focusing on methane recovery and use. And these groups include the Clean Air Coalition, CCAC, the United Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, and the International Energy Agency, the IEA. So just organizationally, GMI consists of the steering committee, our three technical subcommittees, which I mentioned, the project network, and the secretariat that works together to all promote project development and encourage active engagement from our partner countries and the private sector. So the steering committee consists of 12 country representatives, which guide the work of GMI. And that work is supported by the Secretariat, or my group, and that's hosted by the US EPA. Denise Mulholland, which some of you may have heard from before, is our director from US EPA, and me and my colleague Claire Zimmerman work with her to carry out those tasks. We provide administrative and logistical support for the initiative, as well as serving as an informational clearinghouse. The steering committee leadership consists of Tomas Carbonell from the US EPA as chair, and Daniel Tutu Bedafo from Ghana acts as our co-chair. And the other co-chair, M. Nagaraju from India, has recently changed positions, so we're replacing his role with another Indian delegate in the coming months. And delegates from both of those countries also support our secretariat work. And the subcommittees, why we're here today, the oil and gas subcommittee, are hands-on mechanisms where GMI shares technical resources and provides the on-the-ground support to our various partner countries and project network members. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we, over the past 20 years, GMI we're coming up on the 20th anniversary as of this year. So we've done a lot. We've grown to 49 partner countries. We have over 1,000 project network members, mobilized several $1 million for projects and trainings, conducted thousands of technical documents and trainings and tools for our partners. So a lot has been done, and still more to do. And all this work has reduced approximately 670 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent in the past 20 years, and approximately 31 million metric tons CO2 equivalent just for this year. And noting that these are preliminary numbers, but still exciting nonetheless. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's just a slide of some more preliminary statistics outlining GMI's work this past year in 2023. It ranges from capacity building, conducting assessments, and fostering our partnerships with global thought leaders in the field. And so, yeah, I think just something to note here is we've had a lot of consultations and outreach with specific countries, a lot of tools and models developed, and lots of stakeholder meetings, all kind of working to enhance our connections with our network. And I think something to know outside of those statistics and out of the slide is that we've had a lot of growth on all our outreach platforms. So we've had a 58% increase in subscribers on our mailing list, steady traffic to our website, about 1,000 views a week, and an increased presence on LinkedIn, X, and Facebook. So all these outreach efforts have supported our continued work with our countries and gaining more interest in the work that we're doing. So it's a positive growth. And also noting that our 4th newsletter is coming out in October. So if you're not already on our mailing list, please join that so you can get these updates on all the work GMI is doing. Next slide, please. All right, so as noted in our last slide, a lot of GMI's work revolves around trainings and technical tool development. So I wanted to take some time to go over some of GMI's newest tools and resources. So first up on this slide is our case study library, which launched actually just last week at our biannual steering committee meeting. This library, which was requested by our steering committee to have more examples of projects and case studies from all of our work at GMI. It brings together over 130 existing case studies from GMI's website to showcase actions on methane mitigation across sectors of our GMI partners. So this tool is located on our website under the Technical Tools and Resources tab on the top of that screenshot to the left. And I've also provided a link here on this slide, and I'll post it in the chat after my presentation. But this webpage allows users to find stories and actions based on a specific GMI sector of interest, a topic area, or country. You'll see there are those little filter tabs in the left screenshot. You'll also be able to click on each case study for additional details, including a summary of the action, a list of the partners engaged, and a link to read the full case study on another webpage. So we'll be inviting all GMI partners, which includes GMI partner countries and municipalities within those countries, project network members, and our strategic partners to submit additional recommendations for future case studies to add to the library in the coming months. This will be available via an online form, which will be at the top right of the website. So where you see that coming soon button, that will soon be in a few months an area to recommend a case study, fill out a short form with a description. So all these new case studies will have a strong emphasis on lessons learned in order to promote discussion and replicable action for success stories amongst our partners. So we really encourage this group to all join our network if you are not already, and submit an action or case study relating to methane mitigation via this webpage. And again, we'll definitely be sending out more information from the Secretariat side in the coming months. So please look out for that. Next slide. All right, so another new resource posted recently is the revamped Project Network Find an Expert page. So again, I posted the URL on this slide, and I'll be posting it in the chat after the presentation. But this page is reorganized the existing Project Network member page for those of you who saw it, and it's made a lot more easy to search and find Project Network members with specific expertise in the different GMI sectors, as well as information relating to their regions and countries of experience or expertise. So this is all in an effort to better facilitate communication between project developers, technology providers, and our partner countries to coordinate on methane mitigation work. So the GMI Secretariat has also gotten the directive from our steering committee last week to continue our improvements on the Project Network page to really foster more engagement amongst our Project Network member and the rest of our partners. So part of this effort will include reaching out to current members, our current Project Network members, to better understand their capabilities and experiences so we can better market them on our website and improve the navigation of this partner list for the future. So yes, we'll be reaching out to all of you Project Network members. So please check your email for something from the Secretariat in the coming months as well. And we really look forward to your continued engagement with GMI. Next slide, please. Okay. Excuse me. All right. So some other Secretariat priorities of note is our effort to update our partner country pages by COP29. So our team has been working to update the information on these pages to better reflect the current work our partners are doing to address methane, including emissions, an emission summary, methane commitments, methane plans on a subnational or national level, agencies supporting this work, and GMI delegate information. So you'd see on the right a screenshot of the draft of the US page. So it'll be a little snazzier. So we plan on sharing these drafts with each of our country representatives for review near the end of October so that we can finalize these pages before the COP in November. So, and these are all in an effort to showcase our partner countries' leadership on methane for that period. So additionally, we're developing a 20th anniversary webpage showcase GMI's accomplishments over the past 20 years. So our 20th anniversary is also in November. So lots of things happening that month. And we're looking to highlight some of these new resources that I've mentioned today. And we also hope to include some sort of slideshow with pictures and, if possible, testimonials from our partners that we've worked with. So lastly, we'll be supporting subcommittee meetings, which, as we're here today, which we all plan to have in person again in March. So the Oil and Gas Subcommittee meeting will be held in person in conjunction with the UNECE in March 2025. So please mark your calendars for that. This March meeting will follow up on our discussions today on the sprint action plans. So and that will be to finalize the plans and then begin the planning for the implementation phase. So definitely excited to hear what you all discuss about what would be important priorities in the plan. So next slide, please. Okay, so lastly, I'll just wrap it up with a slide here and refer you all to our contact pages. So we encourage you all to submit any questions, share relevant resources or events that you'd like us to promote, and join our mailing list for the latest updates and resources, including our newsletter coming out in the next month. So we encourage you also to follow our social media accounts for all the latest and greatest news. So thank you again for your time, and please feel free to follow up via email if you have any questions on GMI Secretariat actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. I would remind everybody that we do have some limited time over the course of the meeting for questions. So please feel free to post those questions in the chat and try to get our attention. We've got a couple of people watching in the background as well. So even if I am missing your effort to try to intervene, I think we'll be able to do that over the course of the meeting. For the next 40 minutes, we're going to supplement, I'd say, what you just saw in terms of a strict GMI effort with that updates from some of our strategic partners. 10 minutes each, approximately, for us to get updates on some activity running up to COP29, I think, in particular, but also some new program activity that you may not be aware of. In terms of the order, I'll look to my agenda and hope that we've got everybody lined up properly. First, we're going to have Thomas from International Energy Agency. There's not necessarily a long series of slides for all these updates, but just a chance for us to exchange information and get updates on programs there. Thomas, if you're online.
Hello, James.
Hello.
Thank you for this invitation, and good to see you again. So just a few updates from our side. We are kind of continue our ongoing engagement on methane abatement, and we're supporting a number of different countries as they work on emissions estimates, abatement options, policy development, and knowledge sharing. So we had events with Kazakhstan, Iraq, Brazil, and a couple of others, and this is going to build up into regional roundtables that I'm going to be talking a bit about, and that will be developing this year and next year. But the big upcoming event is on the sidelines of UNGA in New York on the morning of the 24th of September, where our executive director, Fatih Birol, and COP29 president will convey a high-level event on turning methane pledges into action. So this event will convene ministers, climate envoys, international organizations, industry, and try to just highlight the importance of the topic and discuss plans underway to address methane emissions. So that the idea here is that we move from the global methane pledge and other commitments related to methane abatement and focus a bit more on the details and the strategies and the plans to get emission reductions, especially in the energy sector. And during this time, we plan to publish an open version of our oil and gas methane abatement model. This will be available on GitLab. I don't know how much this is going to interest folks on this call, but it's essentially another tool to go into the details of equipment level emission sources, abatement technologies, costs, reduction potentials, and things like that. All of that will be the users will be able to tailor it. And we are hoping that we can also get feedback from users in the future so that we can continue to improve our estimates that are available in the global methane tracker. Also at that time, we're planning to release a report which is focused on bringing accountability to the oil and gas industry in terms of their pledges to reduce methane emissions, and in particular the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter. This is being done in partnership with the International Methane Emissions Observatory and the Environmental Defense Fund. And this will be the first in a series of reports and analysis that will be trying to track industry action. What are they reporting? What are the efforts underway in view of their near zero methane targets by 2030? So following this moment in the end of September, we will have, as I mentioned, the launch of a series of regional roundtables on methane. This will be mostly focused on policymakers. Certainly, we will be joined by partners from GMI, from countries, from the World Bank, from the Clean Air Task Force, from the International Methane Emissions Observatory, and others. And the idea is that we will convey policymakers to go a bit more in depth into how they can tackle methane emissions and kind of roll out these detailed plans to reduce emissions. And the first one will be in Baku, in Azerbaijan. It will be on the 2nd of October during Baku Climate Action Week. And it will convey stakeholders from Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Uzbekistan. I think that's all of them. And the idea is we'll go over some of the different barriers, how we can address these emissions, what are the resources available, including the many resources that GMI has very helpfully put together. I'm going to take another look at the case studies. But yeah, it's something that we often refer to, just some of the work and the resources that are available on the GMI website. Together with this first event, we're planning to release a commentary on how countries can incorporate action on methane to their upcoming round of nationally determined contributions, with a specific focus on fossil fuels and in particular oil and gas and to some extent coal as well. So the commentary will explain a bit of what are different strategies, what are some examples of NDCs in place now that incorporate measures to tackle methane emissions in those sectors, and try to forward this agenda. That's kind of the short-term plan. Then we will do other roundtables. We're thinking about a roundtable in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Africa. Still details to be decided and the dates, etc. But very happy to keep you all posted as those develop and we get all the details sorted out. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vlad. For these regional tables, are they going to be all in-person events, or is there a virtual presence anticipated?
I think this is all in person, but let me double check, because sometimes, if someone wants to join it, it's not possible. There's potentially a way to make it happen. So especially if there's someone in particular that wants to join, if it's yourself or someone from GMI, happy to follow up on that and at least explore that option. I think so far it's in person, but maybe there's a way to bring remote participation in.
Yeah, not meaning to sell anything in particular, but as this audience is listening to it, I think it's a similar model being contemplated from a steering committee perspective for GMI. The idea of the Global Methane Forum and bringing the world together once in a while, but looking for us to build some of that capacity through regional interactions, while also acknowledging the challenges for travel. Something that we're working through too from a GMI perspective. So. Thank you very much for that update. I think it's really exciting what the IEA is bringing, and uniquely in terms of the GMI lens, to this oil and gas work in particular. So, a lot of interesting work coming up and some really important meetings. So we'll turn now to Erica from the U.S. State Department.
Hi, everybody. Erica
Yes, we can.
Penzak, from the Department of Commerce Commercial Law Development Program. I'm here to give a quick update on some of our efforts on methane emission abatement governance since the Global Methane Forum in March of this year. Next slide, please. So all of our funding and support for all of our methane work, everything I'm going to cover in this slide, comes from the Department of State Bureau of Energy Resources. So we implement programs on behalf of the Department of State through their Energy and Mineral Governance program. And it's government to government technical assistance that we do. Next slide, please. And so my office exists as sort of a mechanism to give that legal technical assistance. We draw on support from attorneys in the government, from outside of the government, business leaders, policymakers, trying to implement reforms to laws and regulations that are going to modernize commercial legal developments and support economic development. And the energy transition team, we're focused on power sector reform, renewable energy, minerals and mining, and here what's important is decarbonization and especially methane abatement through the adoption and implementation of methane reduction regulations. Next slide, please. So at the forum, my colleague Surya Jayanti and I were on a panel on resources for government ministries to support the development of methane regulation. And on that panel, we introduced a handbook that had been recently published, sponsored by State Department ENR. And it's a resource for policymakers for the developing regulations. It provides an overview of several different regulatory strategies, a lot of case studies on what different countries are doing, and then copious lists of resources on particular topics within the overall umbrella of methane abatement regulation. So things like LDAR, venting and flaring, process equipment standards, and the like. Next slide, please. So the handbook has been translated into several languages. It was written by people, many of whom are represented by agencies who are on this call and who were at the forum. Next slide, please. So since the forum, we have been really busy. We've really tried to use the handbook as a jumping off place to get a little bit more down into the details of the development of methane abatement regulations. Next slide, please. So we had in April, we hosted a regional methane abatement workshop in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And that brought together about 50 delegates from Central, South, and Southeast Asia. And we brought together experts from the World Bank, an International Energy Agency, and the Clean Air Task Force. And so we introduced in this workshop sort of a new interactive regulatory exercise that required the delegates to role play as stakeholders needing to find cost-effective methane abatement solutions. So we're trying to build in some of these sort of interactive thought exercises to our workshops to sort of make things a little bit more interactive, and help people get into sort of the mindset of different stakeholders who are invested in some way in the process of methane reduction. Next slide, please. All right, so in June, we had a U.S. study tour. We hosted 18 delegates, also from Central, South, and Southeast Asia. They were here for 2 full weeks. Senior policymakers and regulators came to Washington, D.C., Colorado, and Texas to learn about policies, rules, and practices that they can adopt to effectively reduce methane from oil and gas operations in their respective countries. So in DC, we had the delegates meet with US federal and energy and environmental regulators. So EPA, BLM, DOE, PHMSA, NIST, NOAA, USTDA, ITA, and the State Department, ENR, and Special Envoy for Climate Change, as well as NGO and industry leaders. I'm not going to name them all. Many of them are folks who we met or got better connected with at the Global Methane Forum, and we're really grateful for that. Again, we had some interactive exercises on drafting regulations, sort of role-playing as different stakeholders, providing comments, and then changing hats to be the regulators, addressing those comments and sort of developing a final rule for methane reduction. Then in Colorado, they toured a tankless low emission operation. And then they also went to the DOE-funded Methane Emissions Technology and Evaluation Center and met with Colorado state regulators. At METEC, they got to enjoy kind of playing around some OGI cameras. That was one of the highlights of the study tour. Then the delegates went to Texas. They toured the UT Austin Energy Emission Modeling and Data Lab, and then attended the Methane Mitigation Technology and Innovation Summit. Next slide, please. So in addition to sort of these regional events where we're bringing folks together to talk in sort of broad detail on a large number of topics, trying to bring in multiple experts, we've also been undertaking a number of bilateral engagements where we're trying to focus specifically on individual country needs. So that can be sort of the development of methane emission roadmaps. It can be a little bit more on the technical side about using those different strategies for measurement and quantification of emissions. Next slide, please. A few other things that we have focused on have been the certified low emission gas. So that's sort of how do we work on really quantifying and verifying the emissions using third parties. Again, we've done some work on specific aspects of technical aspects of LDAR regulations, featuring a host of folks from the federal government and state government here in the US. And again, a little bit more on some of the technical side of things, different systems for repairing leaks and then minimizing venting and flaring. Next slide, please. And as you can see, most of our bilateral events have been virtual. We try to do a mix of the in-person and the virtual to, maximize resources, but also maximize reach. Then in August, with support and funding from State Department's Bureau of Energy Resources, we brought together participants from 11 countries to join a week-long virtual course that was put on by EEMDL that was focusing on measuring and reporting of emissions, developing life cycle assessments, and emission estimates. And most of the folks who attended sort of had already been part of or were part of some of our other outreach efforts. To bookend the course, we had some opening and closing sessions to allow the participants to kind of share their experiences and reflections. And we brought together some folks from both Methane Guiding Principles and the Methane Abatement Financing Task Force for a little bit more content. And then finally, later that month, we participated in the A-Scope Methane Leadership Program's masterclass on tools for designing and financing methane mitigation projects in Bangkok, Thailand. And we served as a judge on the practical exercise where sort of teams had to develop and pitch different methane abatement proposals to a panel of judges who were playing the role of financial institutions. So you can see some of that interactive work sort of throughout as a theme. Next slide, please. So we are continuing with all of this work. And so if you have any questions, I would ask you to please reach out. Also, if you see areas in which there might be room for us to collaborate or coordinate, we'd really appreciate you reaching out as well. As I said, a lot of the folks who we had as speakers at these events were folks that we met or really connected more with at the GMF. We're really grateful for those connections and partnerships. And continuing to work together with all of you.
Thanks very much, Erica. And I'd say that like that is such a reinforcing message for what GMI and the idea of a global methane forum means going forward. If we hit the right cycle for those kind of connections, we're going to reinforce the work that we can each undertake to a limited degree, but building up a network and reinforcing it is going to be the pathway to real success. I have one question for you, not seeing any, but please, if others see it, please remind me. As you've engaged in this regional activity, do you are you tracking the work that emerges from the networking and the tools that you're providing? And I'm asking that in the context of how I introduced this meeting in GMI's efforts to do some matching of needs and experience. Like I do see that as part of the networking going forward. And you've got this program that's going to broadly pulling together a really significant population of people looking for policy development help or developing ideas. Is there ongoing tracking coming out of that process?
Yeah, we are trying. You know, obviously, sometimes you can sort of lose touch with people after events, but we are making a concerted effort to touch base with people and continue the conversation. And as you said, sort of try to track what is coming out of these events. And so that's one of the reasons why we put together the bookends of the EEMDL course in August, really trying to invite everyone who we had worked, well, not everyone, a lot of folks who we had worked with earlier in the year to kind of have that touch base and check in to see what progress has been made and is planned. And I think it's our hope and our intention to try to do that more, because you're right. It's important to try to understand what's coming out of these engagements. And then again, how we can connect people with other resources as they move forward. So in short, yes, we are trying. We're trying to keep track and sort of keep the ball moving.
That'd be great. Like I really think I think your context is bigger than just our oil and gas work here. But to the extent that somebody learns the genesis of change, like through a program like yours, and then wants to connect with some experience in the US, Canada, EU, some of the programs that we're talking about right now, putting those people together are going to accelerate the activity that we're trying to get to for 2030. So, thanks very much for this update. To keep our agenda moving, I'm going to turn now to Robert from the World Bank. I'll give you about 10 minutes to update on the rebranded program that's happening there.
Yeah, thanks, James. And thank you so much for the invitation to speak here on our new global flaring and methane reduction partnership at the bank. I'm Robert. I'm leading bank operations in oil and gas, which used to be very broad investments in the sector. But of course, since the internal realignment in the bank last year, we're now focusing almost exclusively on emissions in oil and gas. Very much aligned with the spirit of the discussion today. Next slide, please. We've established a new trust fund in the bank, which is really like a source of funding for us to be able to have more impact in our portfolio on global efforts to end routine gas flaring and reduce methane emissions in the oil and gas sector. Now, some of you may know that we've actually ran a program in the bank for many years called GGFR, the Global Gas Flaring Reduction Initiative, which was focusing on ending routine gas flaring. But of course, with the recent focus on methane, we're sort of now moving more towards methane. But let me just use this opportunity to mention that we haven't forgotten about the important problem of gas flaring, which of course also through a back door still leads to considerable methane emissions. What we do is we are on the implementation side of the equation. We provide grant funding to clients. We also provide technical assistance. And honestly, in the first year of our funds, we are already experiencing this interesting paradox that a lot of people told us before we started with this adventure, that this is about filling the financing gap. But I must tell you that we feel in a lot of cases it's also about a gap in, let's say, skills to manage, to understand the challenge of methane and how to change your organization to be able to tackle the problem. Which is also why we focus on policy reform and institutional strengthening with a clear bias towards the operator. You may know that in the World Bank, we typically work for states. But of course, in this case, we would work for state-owned entities, which can be NOCs or other operators owned by the state and active in the oil and gas industry. And we also are in the business of mobilizing financing beyond our own trust funds to support governments and operators in having further impact in this space. Next slide, please. Now, we have 6 components in our work program. And if you start on the left-hand side, which is the most important areas for us, it's on the project side. So we work with typically state-owned operators to identify and do a pre-feasibility study of a flaring or methane abatement project. We mobilize finance, which includes our own financing, but also financing from other parties that we can mix and match with the opportunity that we're talking about. And then we provide grant money to basically implement the project. Now, on the right-hand side here, you see that we're also working on a global level to still support the increase of knowledge and capacity and best practices in methane. But there I must say that we have adopted a modest position. It's clear to us that there are many organizations, such as the initiative that we are discussing today, that are in the business of developing and spreading the gospel on best practices in methane. So we see our own role as a facilitating and sometimes convening role, but we will probably not develop a lot of best practices ourselves as the bank. Now, the same for the next point. We're in the business of flaring and methane emissions data also. But also there, of course, it is a space where very many organizations, including IMEO in particular, is playing a prominent role. And we see ourselves as bringing things together and brokering, let's say, a relationship between data providers and sources and clients in the setting of our projects. But let's not forget that in the topic of gas flaring, that of course the World Bank still holds an important repository of flaring data that we've opened to the world and that we plan to keep as a source of information for operators and other interested parties to understand how we're doing in terms of flaring. And then we've still kept the promise of fighting for flaring reduction in particular, but also supporting in our engagements near zero methane commitments by operators. Next slide, please. We're an interesting trust fund, I think, in the World Bank, considering that we are receiving most of our donor money, in fact, from oil and gas companies, which we then use again to help other oil and gas companies, which are state-owned, to take care of this problem. Which means that, yeah, we're sort of a public-private partnership in a way, which is a little bit unique in our own context. Next slide, please. Now, let me tell you, to close off this presentation, a little bit about how we do projects and how you also would qualify, let's say, for our support through this fund. First of all, you have to be eligible in terms of maybe something that's obvious. The project that you would like to undertake needs to fit with our scope, which is it needs to be addressing either flaring or methane emissions. But also, and this is a point I would like to raise for the entire audience today, we have to make sure that we're not duplicating our efforts with anybody else. And I think there's a little bit of a risk for that. It's a crowded space, as they say, that everybody would like to help in terms of methane. I think it's important to discuss maybe also today a little bit how we can make sure that we're all working on this together, but not overlapping in terms of our ambitions to support our clients. Now, in terms of our beneficiaries or clients, I was talking about grant funding earlier, which means that we are in the business of giving away money, which of course means that everybody would like to work with us in a way, because who wouldn't want to receive free money? But I can tell you this money is not for free. What we would like to see is that if you work with us, you need to make fundamental commitments. You need to commit to not just doing a project with us, but also long-term commitments in terms of flaring, in terms of methane emissions reduction, and the willingness to also adapt your organization to the extent needed to execute the projects and get sustainable results. Of course, you have to be acceptable to the bank, and also we need to make sure again that these activities, they fill a gap, that these activities are needed, that the money is in a way well spent and efficiently spent. Next slide, please. Which brings me to our grant allocation criteria. We've set up a list of criteria together with bank management, but also with our donors to make sure that these dollars, that they are used most efficiently and most effectively in a global range of opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, even though we haven't forgotten about flaring, we're now really focusing on methane reduction and give priority to methane projects because of the urgent nature of the methane problem until 2030. Of course, we're still interested in doing big projects in terms of emissions, so volume counts. But then again, I hope that I convince you with this slide that it's not just big plumes that we're looking after. We're also trying to weigh the volume of emissions addressed against some other important factors for success. Cost effectiveness is a big one, where we like to do the best projects or the low-hanging fruits first, and make sure we get quick results also in this space. Now, we'd like to spend money on where technical help is needed, which of course is aligned with our mission in the bank, to help developing countries, to help operators who are less well off financially, but also technically, rather than helping a company who maybe, if you're honest, could do this by himself. Then we expect not just commitments from the clients in terms of long-term willingness to abate emissions, but also engagement in the project and learning from the project and developing your own organization. We're looking for a sustained approach, which means that we typically don't like to do an intervention as a standalone project, but see this as a part of a bigger program to support an operator or a sector in developments, and not just on methane, but on simply becoming, let's say, a better operator. And then we're very focused on trying to reach scalability and replicability, which means that these projects would become more of the same across countries, across regions. Again, this has to do with, of course, the efficiency of the money employed. Now, just a small update. We are now 9 months into our fund, which was, of course, announced at COP28. We've made the first initial commitments to one client-executed project in Central Asia to start with repairs of gas leaks from gas pipelines in the region. And we're just about to sign another agreement with a second client So we're starting up, still in the initial phase of our funds, but we're actually already starting to be successful in this space of implementation of methane action. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Robert. And I think to emphasize your message running through this, so important that we see each other's programs and see how to best allocate them to accelerate change right now. But I think this rebranding of the World Bank efforts and the intersection of flaring and methane emissions is an important area that was not always as obvious as it might have been. I know in Canada, when we started some of our work around methane policy in terms of reductions, flaring certainly was highlighted as a solution. And yet with some oversight and measurement activity, we realized that there was still a substantial problem where there was anticipated flaring that was not working properly and seeing methane emissions from flaring systems. So I know that's not exactly how the program ends up being expanded, but that intersection I think is going to be a crucial one in so many areas going forward. So I really appreciate your update on this program today. The last update that we'll run through for about another 10 minutes is Megan from UNEP from the IMEO organization. Another intersection I think that's really important here. We're going to be able to use the satellite data that we see through the World Bank program and the satellite and other data that we see from the IMEO, put that overlay together in a really unique view of the world. Over to you, Megan.
Thanks so much. So my name's Megan Demeter. I'm a program manager at UNEP's IMEO and pleased to be here today to present updates on our work at IMEO. So if we could go to the next slide, please. By way of brief background on the goal of IMEO, we're really data-centric in our approach. So we're working to provide open, reliable, and actionable data directly to stakeholders that can take action. That's really a focus of what we do as well, is try to identify the individuals who are poised to use data to act towards emissions reductions. So we really see ourselves as interconnecting data with action on science, action on transparency, action on implementation. If we can go to the next slide, what that means is that we are working to create a global public database of empirically verified methane emissions. We launched a beta version of this platform at COP last year. And what you're seeing on the screen now is the new and improved user-centric version that we'll be launching at COP this year. So this is really where that integration of all of the various data sources will convene and will be accessible to the public in a way that's in a platform that's designed to enable action from the takeaways of the platform. And so this is where we will pull in all of the data from the various activities that we manage, including the methane alert and response system, the oil and gas methane partnership, as well as the methane science studies. And I'll speak to each of these in turn, starting on the next slide, please. Where I'll share an update on the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0. Some of you may be familiar with OGMP 2.0. This is the only measurement-based reporting framework for the oil and gas industry. We launched OGMP about 3 years ago now, and to date we've had almost a doubling in our membership. So we now have over 140 member companies that represent about 40% of global oil and gas production. And what's really exciting this year is when companies join OGMP, they commit to reporting across all of their operations and with all of their joint ventures at increasing levels of accuracy and granularity. This means that for operated assets, they start using direct measurements for reporting by their third year of membership. So that means as we're now in year 3, that this is the first year that we're really seeing a substantial amount of reporting based on direct measurements. And so the team is at work now analyzing, compiling, reconciling all of that data and analysis, and we'll be sharing both information at a company level as well as overall lessons learned and key takeaways in our annual report this year, which we will also be launching at COP. Next slide, please. With the learnings that we have from the oil and gas sector, we're also taking this same transparency approach to create a new program for steel. So we're calling this the Steel Methane Program, and this is really focused on reducing the methane emissions from the steel supply chain, which really focuses in on metallurgical coal. We found that methane is about 30% of the footprint of the steel industry, and that mitigation can be affected at a very low cost. And with metallurgical coal in particular, there's no feasible theory of change for an alternative in the same way that there is for thermal coal. So we're really focused here on trying to reduce emissions of something that is likely to stick around for a while. So what we've done so far is worked with the steel sector as well as the coal sector to draft a framework of the program, which is inspired by the success of OGMP and is in particular really focused towards mitigation. We've also been conducting a number of science studies on metallurgical coal to help us understand emissions profiles, as well as establish measurement methodologies that will underpin the steel program. And so for now, we're focused further on engaging metallurgical coal companies to hopefully join this program, as well as, of course, the steel sector, while also coordinating and collaborating with government, civil society, international organizations, and broader decarbonization initiatives. Next slide, please. The next data activity that we lead through IMEO is called the Methane Alert and Response System, or MARS. The goal of MARS is to take satellite data and analyze and interpret it to provide distilled and actionable data to stakeholders in both governments and companies. So we first are in-house analyzing a vast array of satellite data from the current Earth observing suite of satellites. And we do this to first detect major methane emission sources and then attribute those sources to a particular facility, a particular operator, and sometimes even a particular source. Once we have that information, we provide it directly to stakeholders in governments and in companies, with the intention that this is the information that they need to start to take action. And from there, we hope that they take action towards mitigation, and we're working to engage those stakeholders alongside a large number of partners to facilitate and catalyze that action. We can then track the plume, so we can see if action has indeed been taken and validate successful mitigations that occur. We launched MARS in a pilot phase in 2023, and since the beginning of 2024, we have been in its full implementation phase. In that time, we provided notifications for over 700 plumes in over 26 countries. We've been hard at work engaging in particular government stakeholders, so we now have 20 governments that have nominated direct focal points. So these individuals are prepared to receive information through MARS and also hopefully to take action once they've received it. And we've now confirmed 4 successful mitigations. So times where we've received feedback on the fact that action was taken, and we've been able to use the satellite data to confirm that we used to see emissions and we no longer see emissions. So this is a really exciting and tangible way that we can observe and verify real mitigation activities. Going forward, we're focused on increasing new data into our system. So this will include both methane sat and carbon mapper, and we're also exploring other types of data that we can be bringing into the MARS system. We're of course working with our partners and with the focal points that we have to deepen these engagements to hopefully increase the mitigation cases. We are starting to see more and more action taken, but our goal would really, of course, be for this to be the default response to a MARS notification to be mitigation. And then we're also starting to look towards other sectors. So I brought up metallurgical coal previously, and we are soon to launch a pilot of Mars for the metallurgical coal sector to hopefully be providing some of this really critical satellite data in another very important sector as well. Next slide. IMEO is also funding measurement studies around the world. So we, to date, are funding 27 studies in over 21 countries. And the goal of these studies is not only to offer insight into methane emissions profiles, to build the methodologies for measuring and estimating emissions, but also to really hone in on targeted mitigation. So we hope that the takeaways from these studies will be able to guide mitigation not only in the specific geographies where the mitigation, or excuse me, where the measurements are occurring, but also will be able to provide us with guidance and lessons learned on how we should tackle mitigation globally. All of, all of these studies are led by academic and research institutions, and they all end with a peer-reviewed study that will be published in a scientific journal. And so we have 23 journals that we are expecting to publish an article over the course of this year. Next slide, please. And finally, I will wrap with just the acknowledgement, of course, that while we are providing the data that we believe is what's needed in order to take action on methane, we also recognize that there is a need to ensure that all stakeholders have the information available to access and interpret that data. And so simultaneously to all of these data initiatives, we are working with partners on capacity building in countries around the world. So we've designed a training series, which you can see the list of modules here, that are really designed to take stakeholders from the very beginning of what is methane and why is it important, all the way through advanced information on detection, measurement, and quantification, as well as mitigation. And of course, a couple of more technical modules, including one on regulation designed and delivered by the IEA, as well as flaring, LNG, and satellites. So we've deployed this training over 40 times in 30 countries into 1,000 plus participants. And really, we see this as well as a foundational way that we can start to build those relationships and build those trust to increase the capacity of stakeholders to utilize IMEO data and data in the broader methane ecosystem towards mitigation. So if we go to the next slide, I will just say thank you to all the participants, and it's been great to hear everyone else's updates as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. If I could keep you with one question at least before transition. In the list of training that you just provided, is there anything specific to data management? You, I think uniquely, have now been set up over the last few years with the experience from the research studies as well as, well, the Mars program specifically, I guess, looking at global data sets, processing that data, OGMP data, and then, like you said, making contact with at least 20 some countries to use it.
Yeah, it's a great question. So for the time being, we don't have that module. We are always scoping new modules that can be developed. And typically that's in response to what we're hearing from our stakeholders in what types of content they would like to see. And so we've heard that request only recently from a couple of different sources. So I think it's certainly something that we'll look to doing in the future. It seems like a great place that we can have a value add, but we don't yet have a module on that.
I would say, formal or not, getting an understanding of the experience that IMEO brings, from the last few years of managing data, bringing together OGMP data. I mean, it's certainly a challenge that I think that the jurisdictions that are moving forward with regulations need to understand. It's not always integrated in those policy deliverables, but behind it, it's crucial for their success.
Absolutely.
So, thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
So to look at our agenda, I will offer to the audience that we are slightly behind, but I think we've hit kind of the right pace for you to get some exposure to some really important programming that's going on. We do have some buffer, I think, in the next 4 slides because I control that by speaking as fast as I need to try to get us to the Q2. I had offered a break before. I don't think we'll do that, although the end of this section is an opportunity for some, for at least a pause for you to provide information through a poll. So that we'll take advantage and maybe leave that posted for a couple of minutes at least to give people some time to take a break if they need one. So if we can go forward with the next slide. As a subcommittee, responsive to the steering committee efforts to frame how GMI is going to take its work forward, this idea of a renewable action plan developed at the subcommittee level, and particularly to look at sprinting toward 2030 right now is a really important part of who we are and how we're going to integrate with several of the partners that you saw today. The GMF has been a primary deliverable really over the past decade in one form or another, and I think it's really heartening to hear how the programs have been developing over the last couple of years and how the GMF is serving that purpose to tie some of this work together. We spent a full day in March talking about methane in the oil and gas sector, integrated with some of the UNEC programming there. And in terms of takeaways, I think consistent with everything that we've just heard, quantification is an integral part of enhancing inventories to understand where these emissions are coming from, and there's still uncertainty around that. But look at the list of programs and tools that are active now and becoming more active that are going to allow us to better understand those emissions. We often hear this language of top-down, bottom-up reconciliation. That engineering bottom-up work has been used historically, and often we're seeing new measurement work showing that it doesn't align with that engineering approach. But it's getting better, and these research studies that you just heard about from IMEO, if we're going to have 27 published studies, some of that's happening in Canada, and I know we've paid a lot of attention to it in redesigning our inventory approach for understanding emissions from the sector. The second bullet, though, reinforced at the meeting and highlighted here, while we're trying to understand those emissions better, we know more than enough about where those primary emissions are coming from. And the policy is focused on, should be and must be focused on mitigation while we build better monitoring into those systems. So as I just offered in the closure of the IMEA presentation, how we manage that data, what data gets pulled in, and how it is managed and made available is a really important test, but it's not necessarily integrated into the policy itself. And then to tie together some of the early presentations today, the idea that policy action development is happening in several regions and successful methane mitigation is relevant to economic development. So lost methane in almost every case is a lost economic engine, whether it's directly for energy use in the local region or whether it's a bigger part of an economic program. So in that context, what are we going to do going forward? We'll start on our next slide quickly. As a subcommittee now, we try to set up these 3-year work programs, and in 2022, we laid out a prioritized set of actions based on government commitments and interests as delegates to the subcommittee. One was capacity. So the idea that we've got the resources and the experience brought to bear to implement methane policies and projects. The second one, the ability to distribute the tools, data, and resources about methane mitigation. Certainly see some of that available through GMI website and the library that we've developed over time there. Key is how can we distribute it? 3, identifying best practices. So again, some of that represented in historical tools and compendiums specific to the sector. If I said that this was prioritized, I would say 4 and 5, advancing private sector involvement in methane projects, has been relatively limited, if that was one of our priorities. Certainly this concept of a network is part of that, but not tied to specific methane projects that we can report on right now. And then provide training to oil and gas stakeholders. So you saw some of that represented historically through GMI, but not actively from the perspective of subcommittee activity specifically. So I think what we've seen is that we need to identify the opportunities that we have uniquely set up within GMI, and we need to prioritize it and bring the resources to bear that we have access to. Next slide. So what do we got to offer right now? And I'd offer all of you who are participating today, but we will be disseminating this further with regard to especially delegates to the subcommittee. How do we move forward with a new action plan for post 2025 or 2025 and onward? Some of the language you hear on this slide, read on this slide, or hear from me is well aligned with what you saw presented at the beginning of the session today. So the idea of getting more specific right now, looking at these case studies to showcase specific examples of where challenges have been, excuse me, seen and overcome, specific lessons learned that need not be repeated if we're able to communicate them well, and set up successful stories around the oil and gas sector. Second one, to the degree you're seeing today, I think we focused it a lot on program exchange right now, but this idea of peer exchange between partner countries. So we get it at some, excuse me, somewhat with regard to the regional networks and the idea that concept is going to set up, but by its nature, connections, but where we have got work that has gone forward in jurisdictions like North America and Europe especially, can we use some of that learning and set up much more specific exchanges tied to particular aspects of those programs or policies? In that context, the idea of, if the second bullet points to partner countries, how do we broaden it and bring the project network member experience to share? The redesign of the website is going to set some of that up, but as a subsector, again, is an opportunity for us to profile experience through webinars like this, or carry interest into something like the Future Global Methane Forum. Or bullet number 4, increase the collaboration with our strategic partners and recruit additional strategic partners. You saw a reference to some meetings, organizations, I think, with regard to the State Department programs. There are similar activities in Canada. How do we bring some of those academic experience, those research projects, into a showcase here? And lastly, the same in a partner country context. How do we showcase what's happening in our partner country activities? So really, that closes this part of the program, and we're right at 2:45 on my clock. So an hour and 15 minutes into the meeting right now. The next slide is a poll, essentially, to respond to the slide that you see in front of you. Does what you see in 5 bullets make sense? Is it missing something specific? It's an opportunity for you to provide some feedback to it if our polling machine works. So I'd invite you to bring that up right now, Shannon or Emma.
Yep, it's now live, so you shall see it either on your screen or in the chat. And if there is anything you feel like we missed, please feel free to put that in the chat, any additional ideas you may have for priorities. So I'll leave this open for a couple minutes here to let folks respond.
That's what I suggest now. So we're caught up if this makes sense to people. Let's take 3 minutes to allow people to think and type if they want to, or take a break if you need to. When we come back, Justin, I think you're going to come and come on screen and introduce a longer technical exchange right now with regard to a key U.S. policy program implemented as part of regulations for superemitter identification and communication. I'll close now. Justin, if you want to pop up and in 3 minutes. I think then we can run for the half-hour presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Just a reminder too, you do not have to be a delegate necessarily to respond to this question. I know there's still quite a few people who have not responded to the poll, so please do so. All right, well, I'll continue to leave this open because there's still a handful of folks who've not had the opportunity to respond, but I think we can probably move forward a couple slides. Justin, do you want to introduce our next speaker?
Sure. Thank you very much, Emma. And thanks, James, and everybody who's attending today. Yeah, I just want to quickly introduce Ned Shapley from EPA's Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. And he'll be presenting today on an exciting part of our new regulatory policy that the U.S. is implementing now, the EPA super emitter program. Ned, are you online?
Thanks. I'm online. Thanks for the introduction. All right. This is probably about a 20-minute presentation. If anybody has any questions as I go on, I don't mind being interrupted. We can kind of make this a discussion, or we can kind of make it a call and response, however you choose. But anyway, thanks for the introduction. It's also, so we're going to talk today about the super emitter program, which is part of EPA's new source performance standards. This is our regulatory standards for the oil and gas rulemaking for the upstream oil and gas stream. Also, we have emission guidelines, which is rulemakings for our existing sources. So the super emitter program does cover all of our existing and legacy rules as well. Next slide, please. So to get an understanding where the NSPS is covered, the NSPS is covered in the production and processing phase and the natural gas and transmission stage in the upstream oil and gas. But does not cover the distribution or anything beyond the city gates. Subpart W, which does also have similar rules for reporting large emission events, do cover some additional components that are on the energy chain here, but primarily the oil and gas is focusing on the onshore well sites, storage and tank batteries, the gathering and boosting stations, natural gas processing, and in the midstream, the compressor stations, as well as some of the storage tank batteries. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but it's the way EPA regulates our NSPS rulemaking is that we kind of break up the sites into individual effective units. And so when we deal with affected units, you may have a multiple site that is going to be subject to many different regulations within the same rule. And so this is a good breakdown of kind of what those individual affected facilities are for the oil and gas sites, natural gas and boosting stations, natural gas processing stations, and transmission and storage stations segment across all of our Quad O rules. Currently, there are 3 Quad O rules in the book, which will be the 2020 NSPS, which is primarily a VOC rulemaking. So that's going to be for any new source after 2012, and those are the affected sources in that column. Then we have our 2016 rulemaking, which did start to incorporate specific methane regulations and VOCs, but did not cover, say, every of the affected sources on the facility. And then finally, our 2023 final NSPS, that is for any new sources beyond 2022. That final column here is our 2023, which is our emission guidelines, which is for existing sources or any sources that were developed prior to our 2020-22 deadline. And that as those emission guidelines start to kick in, we will start to kind of bring in sources that were developed prior to 2012, as well as kind of close out our 2012 and 2016 and SPSs into the emission guidelines for the state rules. So it's important to think is that all these sources are subject to the super emitter program. They do have specific reporting requirements that they have to do when those notifications are made. One thing to point out, though, even though our emission guidelines don't necessarily kick in for 2 years, we do also require those sources that were developed prior to 2012 to report into the supermitter program when emissions are identified. They may not be required to report the specific information as far as for the investigations that they have to do, but they do have to identify whether they do have a source that at the site that we identified. Next slide, please. All right, so it's important to kind of see where our goals here. And I want to point out one thing that is not on this bullet is that one of the primary goals, similar to IMEO's goals that Megan just discussed, is a program that is widely transparent. So a lot of our actions here are going to be public and facing to make sure that not only owner-operators are identified, but also are aware, but also that the individual state and local governments are aware, as well as the people that are around them. So transparency is our overall goal of this program. Now we look to how the function goes is that we really want to have this goal is to provide owners and operators with actual information of those large emission events, which we have defined as a submitter program as over emissions greater than 100 kilograms per hour. Other things we want to do is that we really kind of want to build off the great innovation that's going on with remote sensing technology, and want to start utilizing that reliable information that that individuals are collecting outside of the U.S. government organization. So this is a pathway to start using that information for other means. Other things, because with this program, because as one of the key importance of this program is that as owner operators are identified, as owners or operators receive these notifications, they're actually required to go out and investigate and potentially mitigate these sources. So our goal here is to try to get these quick reductions in methane emissions and also those other co-pollutants in the oil and gas sector. The key point is getting the information to them so they can trigger additional action or investigation to figure out what's going on. Next slide, please. To kind of get the key points here is that this program does leverage third-party expertise to find large leaks and releases. So this is a program in that it is not the EPA going out there and identifying. It's not the states going out and identifying. It's designed for the public or academic or other research organizations that are using high-quality remote sensing technology to provide that information to the agency so we could trigger additional action. The EPA is in a very centralized role in this program. All the approvals of technologies go through the EPA. All the data submissions will go through the EPA. EPA does have a function to verify the accuracy of the information that's providing to us before sending it to the owner operator. So EPA is in a very strong centralized process in this program. This is a key difference from the proposed rule, but it's one of the things that we put in place to make sure to strengthen the legality of this rule. Only EPA-approved remote sensing technology will be used. EPA has a function for evaluating that technology. And the key point on going back to transparency is that EPA will make all the supermitter data publicly available on a timely basis. Next slide, please. So to kind of focus a little bit more on the technology. So one of the hallmarks of the NSPS rulemaking is that we have tried to embrace the advancement of methane measurement in this program, not only for our leak detection programs, for flare monitoring, but also we incorporated the same type of approach into our supermitter program. We've tried to be agnostic as possible in all of our technology programs and try to limit the restrictions. And so there really is no restrictions to the measurement technology that can be used in the supermitter program. The primary requirements are sensitivity, that you can measure something greater than 100 kilograms per hour. You don't have to measure it down to 100 kilograms per hour, but you have a technology that maybe kicks on at like 500 kilograms per hour. It still can be used because we want that information. And the other kind of key point is that we've got spatial resolution of what's roughly 60 meters. So we require folks to identify the emission within 10 meters, but then we allow kind of a 50-meter buffer around that, given that, some of the spatial resolution, specifically on satellites, while definitely are identifying plumes, sometimes identifying the exact location is a bit of a challenge. So we just want to make sure that we're providing the necessary flexibility on that end. We expect the early participants in this program to be those remote sensing technologies using aerial and satellite data retrieval, primarily because there's a bit of a easier cost point with that. Folks have kind of worked into using satellite data retrieval, using kind of available data sets from international space agencies, and also the folks with aerial do have the ability to do larger type of reviews. So the cost per site goes considerably down. EPA also has a defined process for reviewing this technology. This is the same process that we're using for our leak detection technology evaluations. And basically, the key point is that we're not really looking to evaluate the sensors that the folks are using. We're just making sure that they have a defined protocol and they have they've done some type of empirical verification that their measurement application is able to identify these large leaks and can identify them within a reasonable area. So there's kind of 2 points to this. We have the technology. Once technology is approved, then we can move towards the certification of the third party. Basically, what the third party here is that this is the person that is providing that information from the remote sensing technology to the EPA. We did that for a couple of reasons, primarily because we want to make sure that there was a business model that was out there that if folks wanted to go out there and be able to kind of supply that information to community groups that could be around. But also we wanted to provide some type of buffer between industry and the technology to make sure that industry could not necessarily push back on the use of a technology, but also to kind of put another line in for QAing the data prior to it being submitted. So our review of those third parties is a separate function to the measurement technology. We really don't have much limitations on who can request to be a third party. It just can't be a state and local or the EPA, but it could basically be anybody beyond that. When I say state and local, that would be our state and local parties that may have delegation over the NSPS rulemakings. We also, other key point is that while we did the breakup between the third party and the technology, we do understand there are some philanthropic folks that are also technology providers through like satellite data retrieval. And so there is no limitation that those providers can also be notifiers. The application for this one is not necessarily focused as much on the technology, but it's really more detailed towards making sure that you have a quality management system in there. As I said, the goal of the third party is to go ahead and take kind of an independent review of that information. So the third party is kind of set up like a quality management system. So in this case, we're looking for description of technology being used, a CV of the person that's kind of reviewing the data to make sure there's sufficient understanding of the technology that's being used, SOPs for data management and data quality checks, as well as kind of a written QMP. So for those who are used to typical QA processes, this is the certification for the third party built right up into that. Next slide, please. All right. The next slide here, this is just an example. I've got a QR code in this one. So this is our site for evaluating oil and gas, natural gas, or methane technology. This is kind of the landing page for this. So as technologies come in, they will be housed on these sites. So part of our requirements of the submission is that we have a set information that the technology provider needs to provide us. We are asking these folks to be as transparent as possible with their information. So it's a good understanding of kind of basic understanding of the technology, their workflow, information on some of their validations. And so this is a site that we're housing all this not only for our leak detection and repair program, but also for our super emitter program. So if any folks look at that slide, as people submit information, this becomes public transparent as well as information regarding their application. So this is a kind of a good site to bookmark to get a good understanding of when we start to see technology coming in through our Subcommittee program. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to kind of go over an overview of kind of how this program is designed to work. The goal of this program is primarily speed. The idea is to get information from the detection to the EPA and then to the owner operator as soon as possible. So we've kind of designed our process this way, and I'll kind of work through the workflow how it should happen. Next slide, please. All right, so we have our oil and gas infrastructure on the left, EPA in the center, our technology, in this case, a combined technology provider and third party to the right, our public-facing portal, and the owner or operator. Now, while we do our best to design, it is important that oil and gas processes do leak. We set a process to identify and mitigate these leaks as soon as possible, and basically that's what we're trying to do with the Subcommittee program. Normally, owner-operators will infrequently inspect oil and gas sites, but through the Subcommittee program, it becomes kind of an additional set of information that the owner-operator can use to kind of quickly get some mitigations. So it's a good understanding that as much as we try to do in regulations to prevent leaks, leaks do occur, and we just want to set up a mechanism to kind of get that mitigation going. Sorry about that. So our Subcommittee program, in this case, we're using an example of a satellite flyover. So in this case, our satellite has detected an enhancement from an oil and gas site. That basically starts a clock for that technology provider and third party to provide that information to the EPA. These processes have sped up over time, but in this case, we kind of start that clock at the point of detection. Next slide, please. All right, so from the time of detection, the third party has 15 days to report that detection to the EPA. If they cannot report that detection to the EPA cannot trigger that notification to the owner or operator. We do that for a couple of reasons. One, it's in our regulation, and that was a point in time that at the time of the regulation that we thought that was a good middle point between what the owner operators were asking for and what was achievable from the technology providers, just to make sure that, one, they're acting as quick as possible, and also having information that is not too delayed where it might be difficult for an owner operator to potentially do the root cause to figure out the sources of emissions. So as part of that 15 days, they have 15 days to report us the date of detection. Sorry, I got a cloud in the way there. That says location of the event of the latitude and longitude coordinates. We want them to identify who they think the owner operator is between an oil and gas natural facility within 50 meters of the coordinates, an identification of the technology being used, some type of documentation imagery that's kind of widely dependent on the technology being used. Once again, this is kind of satellite, so we would kind of probably look for some type of overflow or an overlay map. An idea of what the emission rate is in kilograms per hour. We do recognize that 15 days is really difficult to kind of do that type of quantification. So there is, we just want something there. It doesn't have to be super accurate. And then once again, kind of an attestation statement, because we want to make sure that the third party does believe this is true and accurate. Because once again, this information is triggering an obligation on the owner operator to go and investigate. So that information goes to the Subcommittee program, to the portal, to the EPA. And next slide, please. The EPA is going to look at this and conduct kind of an evaluation of notification for completeness and accuracy. When the notification meets these conditions, EPA, and when I say EPA here, this is greatly the Office of Air and Radiation, and our Office of Compliance Assurance. And the Office of Compliance Assurance is the one that's running the portal. We'll be doing a lot of these actions that I'm going through in these slides. So as they do that, they'll assign a unique identification number and then provide the notification to the owner operators. And at that time, post that notification on the public-facing portal. Next slide, please. So this is going to trigger an obligation on the owner or operator to go out and investigate. They have to initiate the investigate within 5 days. and report back to the EPA within 15 days. Now that is a really quick time frame, but once again, we're looking at these very, very large emission rates that believed could potentially the bulk of the emissions that we're seeing from this sector. So this goal is to kind of start to eliminate these large emission sources. So that's why we're kind of pushing a very, very tight time schedule for that one. Now, unlike our typical leak detection program, where we may get a little prescriptive on how they need to do the investigations, we do provide them kind of a more flexible pathway for identifying these large emission rates. We do not provide any limitations on what can be used, but we do kind of have them kind of 4 key areas that they need to take a look at. One, we want them to kind of look at their monitoring data from their controls. So we're looking for parametric information that maybe identify the potential release, look at any potential future emission surveys they've done from the time of the detection until now. If they have a continuous emission monitors on site, take a look at them to see if they can provide that confirmation. And of course, if none of that is there, they would then be required to go out and screen the entire well, production facility, or compressor station with OGI, Method 21, or any one of our other approved kind of leak detection technology programs that were integrated into this rule, be that drone-based, aerial-based, ground-based. Next slide, please. So as I said, they have to investigate within 5 days, and they have to report back to us within 5 days. The owner-operator is then going to report back the date and the time of the suspected end of the superemitter event. If they don't have that one, that's, if they don't identify an event, that's great, but we just want to make sure that they've confirmed that it's not there. We're looking for the confirmation that they in fact own the site, some information about the facility, and then of course, if the facility is subject to one of our existing NSPS rules, and if there was an active event going on, we do want them to ID the source and ID if the source is subject to an existing NSPS rule. This kind of provides information back to the portal, back to the EPA, as well as back to the public to kind of give kind of a closed loop of the superemitter event to identify the, hey, what was going on and what was the cause, and ensure that it is over. Next slide, please. So one of the key points that I did forget to bring up is that there is a fair amount of uncertainty in satellite data and even aerial data to identify exactly where something is coming from. And another challenge is always determining who actually owns a site at a given time. And so while EPA is typically as transparent as possible, I think our initial updates to the superemitter portal will not include the attribution of the owner-operator, and that will only identify the owner-operator site once it's been confirmed as part of the report back to us. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot of the Methane Superemitter Data Explorer that OWECA is developing. This is kind of a mock-up of what it will look like once it goes live. They've done an excellent job in developing this application, and it kind of keys into kind of what our overall transparency goals with this program. As we get this information, the site will be populated and be easily observable. Next slide, please. All right, so while this is slightly outside of our NSPS program, I did want to touch base on our Subpart W and our greenhouse gas reporting program, as they are also kind of integrated into our superemitter program as well. So to ensure kind of the data from the superemitter program is getting reported, any Subpart W facilities that receive a superemitter notification, they're also required to submit that information to us as part of their annual reports, not only as part of the annual reports to the NSPS, but as part of their annual reports to Subpart W. And so the goal is to make sure that any superemitter notification will also be integrated into the Subpart W program. So as the owner-operator gets this information, they're on the hook to report kind of what their expected overall emissions were from that specific event. And then, of course, that works into the greenhouse gas reporting, and then there's potential charge that could be applied as part of the waste emission charge. Thresholds for the waste emission charge at an ethical facility start about $900 per ton. So the super event, depending on how long it goes, could potentially lead to an additional significant charge. This key point that are certain exemptions from reporting, specifically netting across facilities, is allowed. Next slide, please. All right, so this is kind of keying more on the greenhouse gas reporting program. So they don't always use the term super emitter program. They're using the term other large release events. And so the super emitter program notifications associated with the facility must be reported to the greenhouse gas reporting program annually. Also, any additional large emission event across the subpart W coverage would also need to be reported, unless, of course, there was a demonstrable error associated with it. The types of data that facilities can kind of use to quantify what the emissions are from these other large emission events for super emitter programs could include direct measurement, kind of looking at parametric monitoring for that, and remote sensing technologies. This is kind of a key point to ensure that we're kind of pushing for more monitoring in subpart W program, because if no monitoring event is occurring as part of the super emitter notification, they would have to assume kind of a default rate of 90 days for the purpose of calculating those events. Next slide, please. To kind of give some folks an idea on the stats right now, the program, all components of the program are active, and what we're doing is we're currently waiting for technology and third-party submissions. We're in communication with more than 2 entities that are telling us that they'll be submitting in the coming weeks. So we're excited to start working on that part of the program. The key point of that is that our data portals are built and ready to receive information once we've got approved technology. So we have to have the approved technology and third parties approved before we can have the submission of the data. As part of that development of the data tools, OEEC has done a great job developing a tool to kind of aid those third parties in the attribution of sources, as well as developed a mechanism for informing those folks in and around those areas when those emission events occur. EPA will have some webinars in the book once we start to receive those third-party applications to kind of go through the functionality of the portal, and so folks have a good understanding. EPA is kind of using our delay. I think we had hoped to be started with this program, but we are kind of limited by voluntary action of folks coming into the program. But EPA is using this delay to continue to kind of improve the functionality of those data portals, and I'm really excited for those to go live. Next slide, please. This is just kind of another slide as a takeaway. So we have done some existing workshops and webinars on the rule itself, as well as how we're dealing with technologies and the third parties. Here are some links to the sites where we've got links to the material that was used for that, as well as videos of the webinars themselves, if that's informative to you. Here's a link to where the submission portal and the data portal will be kept. And then finally, there's the subpart W question, and then page. And then next slide. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thanks very much for that, Ned. That incredible program, something, maybe some parallels to what we've seen presented earlier today. But to integrate it into a regulatory approach, a really amazing concept to kind of get running. I'd invite people online to post or raise their hand for questions, but I've got a couple of things I'd like to follow up on. We've got about 10 minutes, I think, that we could use for this purpose. Taking as much of your time as we can. One of the questions I have in the development of the concept of the program. So these EPA rules are built under the U.S. Clean Air Act, I think. Like, is it a brand new concept, or did you have something to work from with regard to this third-party concept?
So it's the first of its kind to that extent, but the actions are all under the Clean Air Act. It's a combination of our 111 authority. So in this case, it is a compliance assurance for the existing fugitive source program. So it's another set of information that we could trigger, that informs the owner operators. So it kind of helps them with some additional information on fugitives to kind of get further mitigation. And then it also kind of utilizes our 114 authority to identify and trigger responses from owners and operators. So it's not a new concept. It's a new concept in that it's never been utilized before, but we are using existing authorities within our Clean Air Act.
So, I mean, I ask that selfishly from a Canadian perspective as we watch something like this come into being. And I guess a warning to our audience, because like as you explained, that like the precision with which you develop a program like that, it all depends on the rules that you're building it under and what you're allowed to do with it and how you're allowed to use that information. So
yeah, so I mean, a good resource for that one is that there's a significant explanation in our preamble of the authorities that we're using and why we're using that were written by a team of great attorneys that I can't provide I can't provide the justice to do the explanation that they could for how we were able to justify the program. But it is new, but we are using existing authorities to operate it under.
And so understanding that structure then, to what extent are the parameters driven by explicit historical data analysis? So the 100 kilograms as a definition, is that an analytical delineator, I guess, to understand what proportion of emissions you think you can manage through this program, and both in terms of the kind of the bulk emissions per event, as well as the timeliness of it. Like I heard you describe the practicality of managing that information, but do you have enough understanding with historical emissions to understand how long events last and when the program's going to work and when it's going to miss something?
So, I mean, I think that's a good question. So 100 kilograms per hour was a defined thing that we did as part of our proposed language that we took comments on. That was a point that we had decided that if a emission had lasted for a period of time, one, it should be large enough so that's easily identifiable, but also represents potentially the bulk of emissions from a site. So that's how we landed on 100 kilogram per hour. In our evaluation, we didn't really evaluate persistence or intermittence, more or less just an identification that it's a large emission event that we either A, needed to be mitigated, or B, a known source that could be either identified or potentially through engineering controls reduced in the long run. So it's the goal is to kind of start to minimizing to emissions below those points.
And in that regard, then the answer is not identify something and then move it to zero. It's identify it, understand it, and setting forth a plan. The operator setting forth a plan to get it to a managed outcome rather than a particular number, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it's twofold. One, there is an understanding that many of the notifications may be from an intermittent event. And so the idea is that, one, if something is persistent and it's ongoing, we're getting those mitigations right away. But if it is an intermittent event, and it's an intermittent event from a non-allowable source, and you provide, we're providing that mechanism to do that investigation early on, engineer controls can be put in place to start minimizing that. So that's kind of the two goals that we have. That one, start to identify what are the causes of those emission events, and that if the emission is ongoing, getting the mitigation right away is kind of step one. But two, to kind of get an understanding of what are causing these potentially intermittent large events, so we can get fixes in place to minimize those. Because the last thing I think the owner operators want to do is to keep triggering responses for things that could be mitigated through other means.
Right. If they can see it to that specific, if they can see the specific outcome, even if it is already addressed. Okay.
Yeah. Good example of that one. That's It's also why we try to include some of the parametric monitoring into that one, that maybe temperature pressure identifications are helping them to identify when those events happen, so they can potentially send folks on site to minimize those.
Okay. I don't think you're on the line for the some of the beginning of our meeting, so I'm not sure if you heard some of the back and forth with regard to some of the international programs, but any attempt or expectation to be able to integrate information with other programs, especially as you talk about setting up these portals for information?
I mean, I was lucky enough to listen to Megan's presentation, so her wonderful presentation. I mean, for our program, you know, our just like them, we're trying to be as transparent as possible with the data. So there's the potential that even our information that's coming to our program may inform what they're able to look at. You know, it's, and as for our program, anybody that would want to integrate with our program, we're always happy to talk to them, and would always encourage any and all to participate in that program, because as we get more people looking at the data, we're able to get more information into that one, so we can provide more information to the owner operators on those emission events. So, you know,
so you're a third party.
Potential. What? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I'm saying, so the third party is not the technology provider. It can be a program that's using even technology ABC, as long as it's packaged up and approved from an EPA perspective.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
And especially when it comes to satellite data retrievals, that there's many people processing the same data sets. So more folks and more eyes and more plumes identifications leads to better identification. So.
And the last point you made, I think, with regard to what you described as maybe more time than you expected or hoped for, but using that to understand your data management process. You said webinars about how the program will work. Is there an opportunity to have some more discussion around the operational aspect of it in terms of data management? I do think so many people are trying to figure out how to find and set up data, especially with regard to that portal concept. And it's definitely happening for us right now. Our colleagues at Natural Resources Canada have allocated some funding for projects to develop exactly that concept, to try to create this interactive portal to see information as it comes through our policy work.
Well, I don't want to volunteer someone who's on this call right now, but I do have one of my colleagues from OECA that I notice is on this call here, that I'm not sure if Aaron Margulis participates routinely with this organization, but, you know, he's from our Office of Enforcement and Compliance, and his office, and specifically him and a number of other folks, are developing the data processes. So that may be something that he could speak to on another call, but don't want to volunteer for Aaron ahead
for
of
sure.
time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
no commitments, but it's certainly interesting.
I can follow up by email, not a problem.
That would be fantastic.
Excellent.
With that, Ned, I think thanks. I hope I didn't cut anybody off, but we've taken more of your time than we hoped for. So really thank you for making yourself available and setting this up for us. I think this is an example of a country-specific implementation and operating setup for specific regulations, but the learnings that we're going to get as countries are moving forward with this kind of program and setting them up in this map of global activity, I think is we're poised for real change. I can't come fast enough in the context of global methane pledge, but we really have come so far in the last couple of years. So with that, I'll run to the ending slides and close the meeting in a couple of minutes. We did want to talk briefly about the forthcoming meetings, some of which have already been mentioned. So this is an important part, I think, of the Global Methane Initiative function, to try to draw attention to the activity that's going on out there. And my characterization of it, in terms of chairing our subcommittee for oil and gas, is that you don't always need to look for methane in the title of events, because there's a lot of methane mitigation discussion going on at the traditional oil and gas events. But there certainly are some specific climate meetings that are coming up in the next few months. The UN Climate Week was already mentioned in the IEA presentation. Siege4 Connections, several years of experience now with regard to methane emission mitigation solutions, happening in Colorado in October. Soon after that, the MDEL second annual event, so labeled as annual, second time it's happening. You saw the connections there to some of the EPA work and the State Department work that are going on, and how important that's becoming. And I think a lot of that data would have been relevant to some of the analytical framing of the policy development work in the United States too. And then to circle back to the top of the slide, we again expect to have with the UNECE a group of experts on gas, a joint meeting in the end of March in Geneva. Similar setup to what occurred with regard to the Global Methane Forum, but a more focused event in terms of a subcommittee meeting. But the UNECE effort is a larger meeting as part of a series of meetings. So still expect that we would have upwards of 100 people attending the event, an opportunity for us to build the network in that sense too. So with that, I think we move to our last slide, closing this event for today. We saw some of these opportunities for connections earlier in the beginning of the meeting today. The Global Methane Initiative website, various pathways through it. You can see especially some of the oil and gas activities there. So we welcome your participation and feedback. The question that we posed today, we'll be managing that data and potentially reaching out for more information as we characterize it and set up the action plan going forward for discussion at our next meeting, at least in person. I do think understanding the benefit of these webinars, virtual connections, and the kind of program or case study material that's relevant to you is important as well. So please feed back that information. The Secretariat email is the best way to get it noticed. There are opportunities for us to connect individually though too, and I'd welcome that, and we'll do what I can to carry it forward. So thanks very much everyone for your participation today. I hope you found value from it. We'll build on it going forward. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.